Welcome to the 7th episode in a Legendarium series about the life and reign of King Edward III. In Part 7, The Black Prince, we will talk about how King Edward's son won a triumph to rival his father's victory at Crécy more than a decade earlier. On St. George's Day, 1349, King Edward III hosted a tournament, even as the Black Death ravaged his kingdom. As people died by the hundreds each day, the king intended to found a new chivalric order to celebrate his victories in France. Enthralled by Arthurian lore, Edward III had long held round-table banquets and urged his men to show gentleness towards women and the impoverished. While the war interrupted his plans to create a round table, he hit upon the idea of founding an order to promote brotherhood and loyalty. To that end, he invited 25 veterans of the war in France, including his son, Edward the Black Prince. The knights divided into 2 teams of 13 and rode against one another until one side emerged victorious. After the tournament, Edward III formalized the fraternity as the Order of the Garter. A legend later emerged that the Countess of Salisbury dropped her garter, a lay garment, during a dance. King Edward III returned it to her with the words, "Evil to him who thinks evil of it." In all likelihood, the name came about simply because pearl-encrusted garters were commonly worn at court by both men and women. The Order of the Garter was one of many knightly orders popping up across Europe, like the Society of the Buckle in Germany and the Company of the Black Swan in Saxony. After the tourney, all 26 founding members swore solemn oaths and pledged to honor St. George's Day. If it sounds crass to celebrate knightly values when so many died from the Black Death, that's what many people at the time thought. Indeed, King Edward III was less concerned about restoring Camelot and more worried about glorifying service overseas to help keep his feudal retinues in France. He wanted to make foreign service an honor, not a wearisome burden held over from feudalism. In 1350, work began on the College of St. George, the new order's home. King Edward III spent £6,500 over the next 7 years, mainly on the order's chapel. The king also gave it the Cross of Ghent, a fragment of the true cross taken during the conquest of Wales in 1283. To remind his subjects of his military successes, he flew the arms of St. George wherever he could and sent dozens of patrols to keep control of the English Channel. The Black Death brought the war between England and France to a halt. Things changed with the death of King Philip VI of France, who was succeeded by his son Jean. King Jean II kept the peace for now, so Edward III turned his attention to Castile, which had taken to raiding English shipping. On August 29, 1350, an English fleet of 50 cogs met a fleet of 20 Castilian galleys off Winchelsea, on the southern coast of England. King Edward III and the Black Prince personally commanded the fleet. Edward's boats charged the Castilian galleys like battering rams, as his men threw grappling irons on the ends of ropes or chains to embed in enemy ships. Parties of knights boarded enemy vessels, killed the sailors, and threw their corpses overboard. King Edward's ship was sundered by a Castilian galley, and he only saved his life by fighting his way aboard and seizing the enemy ship. As darkness neared, a Castilian survivor began towing away a ship bearing the king's household and was only stopped by a servant who snuck aboard and brought down the enemy's sail. This victory became known as the Spaniards in the Sea. Upon returning to England, King Edward III faced a world much changed by the Black Death. Before, high population and low surpluses kept peasants in their place. Now, with so few skilled hands left to do the work, peasants found themselves in a position to call the shots. They began demanding payment for their work, often in hard currency. Lords and ladies endured the shock of hearing their servants talk back, demanding better treatment, and simply leaving if things weren't to their liking. These lords had to compete with one another to make the highest bid and secure the few peasant laborers remaining. Many of the lordly families who sat in Edward's parliaments and granted his taxes feared they would be ruined. King Edward passed the Ordinance of Laborers in 1351, which sought to keep wages at pre-plague levels. However, keeping wages down was a constant struggle for only piecemeal results and led to simmering resentment among the peasants that would explode into open revolt a generation later. In 1353 and 1354, the English and French met at Guines to talk peace under papal authority. The Duke of Lancaster demanded a high price for peace, insisting on English control of Normandy, Poitiers, Anjou, Aquitaine, and more. King Jean's envoys flatly refused, and by the autumn of 1355, Edward readied 2 large invasion forces. He commanded one, and his son the Black Prince commanded the other. King Edward III landed in Calais in late October, but returned to England when the Scots menaced his northern border. Edward III put so much Scottish land to the torch that July 1356 became remembered in Scotland as burned Candlemas. Meanwhile, King Edward's second son, John of Gaunt, raided Normandy. Meanwhile, Edward the Black Prince set out from Aquitaine in southwest France to raid central France. His army included 4,000 knights, 4,000 mounted cavalry, 3,000 archers, and 1,000 infantry. They avoided fortified locations and instead looted undefended smaller towns. Unsurprisingly annoyed, the French army, led by King John II, crossed the Loire River to challenge the Black Prince. King John outnumbered the Black Prince 2-1, and moving at greater speed, he intercepted the English east of Poitiers. Forced into a battle, the Black Prince took a slope protected on his left by a marsh and a hedge to cover his front. On his right flank he placed his wagons. The Black Prince lined up his archers behind the hedge and dismounted his knights. The first French force tried to storm through a gap in the hedge. As they neared the gap, English archers opened fire, knocking the knights off their horses. A second French force, led by the Dauphin, marched up the slope only to be mowed down by heavy fire. To refill their quivers, English archers pulled arrows from French bodies. A third French force, led by the Duc d'Orléans, fled the battlefield. When King John II made one final attack, the Black Prince sent a reserve cavalry force around the French flank to attack them in the rear. In the intense fighting, many English archers battled with knives after exhausting their arrow supply. Finally, King John II himself became a prisoner and dined with the Black Prince in his tent. Jean II had lost 2,500 dead and 2,600 captured, including himself, to 1,000 English dead, despite outnumbering the Black Prince 2-1. The Black Prince won a victory on a par with his father's triumph at Crécy a decade ago. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.